Okay, so we're gonna go over a couple different topics. How are you, by the way?
I'm very good. I'm very good. How are you?
Awesome. I'm doing good. What do you got in your glass there?
I have a little number here. It's a
Okay.
Penderyn Celt. It's a single malt, smoky. It's very nice.
Nice, nice. I got some cold brew here.
I drink my way through every stream that we do together.
I
So
I've noticed that. Yeah.
the
Okay. So
British way.
so real quick. So we're gonna talk about abortion, but the first thing I want to ask you before I get into that, um, is a thing I've been pondering, and so it's not abortion related. Let's imagine in the future we start having almost all of our doctors are AI doctors. So they look like humans, but they're AI, so we can program them with however we want to program them. They are just better at looking at a situation, detecting like these are the odds of saving this person. This is what this person has wrong with them. And so here's my question. If we ideally there would be all the right amount of doctors and all the right amount of hospitals and ERs and that kind of stuff. But every once in a while, we will have it wrong. And so imagine an ER that has an AI doctor. There's only one AI doctor in there. And for some reason, there's just not others. They're broken down right now. Two men show up about the same time. Both of them have been stabbed. The AI doctor can detect that if they save one, the other one will likely die. So whichever one they go with, the other one will likely die. I guess before I go any further, do you have any thoughts on how we should program the AI, and similarly today, how we should have regulations for our doctors that would say why save one versus the other?
I suspect that any kind of regulation like that would basically be along the lines of the basic level of triage that they've got now, which is essentially that the person with the most need in a given situation is the person, or with the highest likelihood to survive at a given time, is going to be the one that takes preference. Obviously, this being a very difficult ethical question because when you think about things like self-driving cars, for example, and the question of is it okay for a self-driving car to swerve from a group if it means hitting a single person and things like that? How can you
Mm-hmm.
make that ethical question? Um, so, without obviously knowing all the details, I'd have to say that it depends, but generally when it comes to a kind of accounting of the situation that you're sort of squaring off two harms, then a basic objective analysis of the weight of those harms and the veritable the different situations, respective situations, is probably the way to go.
Okay. And do you think it's more like which one are more likely to save, or is it whatever action is most likely to save the most people? Like so, if person if they save person A, then they have a let's say a 1% chance of saving person B. But if they save person B, they have a first they have a 2% chance of saving person A. Do you think how they calculate things should be um, like something like a mixture of whoever needs the most immediate help, but once you know that both need equal immediate help, that it's whatever they can do to attempt to save the most people, something like that?
Yeah, it seems reasonable at a glance. If Yeah, it seems reasonable at a glance where the option is to save one person or another person or a group of people versus an individual, that the principle of harm reduction can apply in that case. If the situation was, say, that you had to save a group of people by inflicting harm on another person, specifically inflicting harm on another person, as opposed to just saving them,
Mm-hmm.
not helping them, I mean, then that's different. So, for example, with the trolley problem, as you probably familiar. The trolley is on a track heading towards a group of 5 people, and you have the option to pull the lever to change the track, but by doing so, you'll kill one person who's on the other track. My personal belief is I don't believe you have the right to pull that lever, and that it's morally preferable to allow people to die rather than to specifically take a life.
Yeah, no, and I agree completely. Yeah. Okay, so now let's change up a couple things. So let's say that at this future time when we have AI doctors, there's also cameras everywhere, and the security footage that cameras are capturing everywhere somehow goes into the minds of the AI doctors. And let's say that the 2 people that were stabbed were caught on camera, and person A was stabbed by person B, and then during the tussle, they took the knife and stabbed person B back in self-defense. And not that we want to say that AI doctors are like going to be judges or anything, but we'll just say that this is indisputable. That there is nothing that caused this, that innocent person A was just hanging out, and person B, not provoked at all, comes up and stabs person A. And so we have this same scenario where let's say it's not likely that you could save both, but if you save innocent person A first, then person B has like a 1% chance of making it. But if you save person B first, the bad guy, the one that attempted to kill somebody and might be successful at it, if you save them first, then you have like a 5% chance to save person A. Do you think that anything like that should be factored in, or previous things like they're both citizens on the street now, but a couple of years ago, one of them just got out of jail for some horrible crime, or one of them's covered in like swastika tattoos and the other's covered in stars and moons tattoos? Like, should anything affect it?
No, if you're going to use like a sort of an AI model to kind of produce, let's call them objective or semi-objective outcomes, then the AI really should be constrained in its use. So it shouldn't be making the human decisions on behalf of the humans. That those kinds of ethical questions should be for the doctors to decide. So in this case, all things being equal, you should preference the victim as a human matter, but the AI system shouldn't preference the victim. It shouldn't preference certain political views, even if those political views are outside the Overton window. All of that stuff is irrelevant. The AI should be supplementary. It should not be primary. It should be a tool to help provide care. It should not be the determining factor of the care.
Gotcha. And I pretty much agree. Just to make sure, though, I don't know if I agree that doctors should, like the non-AI doctors, should be able to make choices differently. Ideally, I would think that they should do this exact same thing. Do you think that as well?
Yeah, of course. I mean, obviously, in a real world situation, the doctor can't make that determination. It's not like you bring these 2 people in who are in the exact same position, but the ambulance person coming in says this person stabbed this person first, and then they retaliated and they take the victim, the first person, and disregard the second one. This is obviously in the hypothetical situation, you preference the victim, but obviously in an actual real medical setting, then no, you would treat them as equally as you could. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah. I feel the same way. So like if I was a doctor and I was just at home, or if it wasn't in a society, I was just like living out in nature or something, if that situation came to me, I would save the innocent person. But if I was a doctor in a hospital and I wanted the society to run right, I would want there to be something in place where essentially what the job of doctors would be to help as many people as possible. So, yeah. Okay, so here's where it gets a little more tricky. Do you think anything should affect it outside of odds? And the main thing I can think of would be age. So if there was like a 30-year-old and a 90-year-old, and we have similar odds. Like if you save this one, then you have like 1% chance to save the other one. If you save this one, you have like a 2 or 3% chance. Is there ever a case where you would say, if saving the 90-year-old is going to let the 30-year-old die, that we kind of just have it understood within our society that once you hit a certain age, we have to give preference to the other? And then if that doesn't affect you at all, what if the 90-year-old has like cancer and they are predicted to live one more year? Should anything like that affect if that lets them get primary choice or not?
No, I mean it's a difficult one. I couldn't say for sure right now. I would say that as a general rule, this is actually something we spoke about when you and I did the conversation/debate with Travis about the principle of providing a greater level of care to those in a more vulnerable situation. So, as an objective, impassionate matter, like a flat neutral matter, of course, on paper, you would say that if a 30-year-old and a 90-year-old came in needing the same care and there was only one available, that you would give it to the 30-year-old because they had the higher chance of making the most, they had the greater potential. But I think that's actually, I don't think that's as clear-cut a right answer as it seems, because actually it's also an ethical good to provide more care and more attention to the vulnerable than it is to those who have some semblance of the ability to look after themselves. So the example I gave in that discussion with Travis is that you have two dogs. One is a dog that barks and the other is a dog that's lost its ability to bark. Which one do you treat better? Well, theoretically, you treat the dog that can't bark better because you have to be more attentive to its needs. It can't communicate to its human its needs in the same way that a dog can bark. So it can't let you know when it's hungry, when it's frightened, when it's angry, when it's scared, whatever else. And so you have to give it more attention. You have to look for more subtle cues in order to provide for its needs. And that's the proper thing to do. The same for example, welfare systems. You could say, well, we should privilege people who are, let's say, better for society, the Elon Musks of society. We need to give them subsidy. We need to give them advantage in order to make the most of their abilities. However, our societies aren't actually set up towards that. We give a great deal of freedom to those people to pursue their own ends. And we give the people, say, with Down syndrome or crippling disabilities, we give them the benefit of welfare programs because we recognize that we attempt as best we can to lift up and provide the most care and the most support to the most vulnerable. And so in the case you're citing, it's not necessarily the right thing to do to, for example, with AI, to bake in considerations like, well, this person's too old, get rid of them. That's kind of the current thinking behind things like assisted dying. So there's assisted dying legislation going through, obviously, in Canada, is going through in my country as well. And one of the primary arguments is that older people are a drain on the healthcare system. Now, this is an obscene case to make, to say that people who have contributed, say, for 70, 80, 90 years should be considered mere economic units. I think that's absolutely disgusting. And so I think we ought to be very careful with these AI mechanisms for health in not treating people merely as units, as data points. And actually, we should look at it much more compassionately.
Yeah, definitely. And it's another thing that's interesting about it is the looking at like negative rights versus positive rights. I think since we're looking at positive rights, like no human is necessarily owed being saved or protection, like whatever a doctor could offer. It's just the fact that we have figured out how to do these things, these surgeries or whatever, and we can offer them. It's great. And so I think when we look at these positive rights of being offered healthcare, it's it's reasonable to maybe look at these different things, like a 90-year-old or 95-year-old that has like a year left versus a 30-year-old. I'm not sure where I'd land, but I ponder it differently than if it was like negative rights, where if some person broke into somebody's house and killed a 95-year-old or killed a 30-year-old, I would want that person punished equally for both. I would think that I don't care, like if that guy didn't know and the 95-year-old was going to die in 3 days, I don't think it should be less of a punishment than taking the entire life of a 30-year-old. In both cases, it's these negative rights that we say, like, you cannot kill somebody, and like that's just. Do you view those as different? Like, do you view it as if you kill somebody? Outside of different things like manslaughter, second degree versus first degree, just in general, first degree murder, is it pretty clear cut in your mind that it doesn't matter the age? It could be a 1-day-old baby, a 30-year-old, or a 100-year-old with terminal cancer, that those are kind of equal, where the offering healthcare isn't exactly equal?
Yeah, I don't think your sentence should be altered by the circumstance of the person. And I would extend it from, you said 1 month old, I would go -9. But,
Fair. And we're about to get into that too. Okay.
yeah.
So, now that we get that out of the way, one more thing on the hypothetical. So we had the version where it's 2 men come in that are stabbed. And then we talked about age, 30 versus 90. And I'm guessing it's not any different if it was like a 1-day-old versus like a 20-year-old. It's the same thing where the doctor saves in the order that they can save the most.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, I don't know if I've ever talked to you about this, or I just have a bad memory, but do you have any exceptions when it comes to abortion? And let me be clear that when I discuss abortion with people, I don't mean the medical sense of abortion where people include like miscarriages and all these different things. I mean the intentional killing of an unborn human by the decision of the mother. Are there any cases in there at all? Like, a lot of people talk about rape and incest. They'll talk about the life of the mother. They'll talk about just various different things like that. Sometimes it's not the life of the mother; it's severe physical harm of the mother and stuff like that. Do you have any of those?
No, I don't. So there are very, very rare cases where the baby could survive the delivery, but the mother could not. In any case, there are very, very rare circumstances in which the mother's life is forfeit no matter what they do, unless they terminate. I'm led to believe that's the case. So I'm taking those out in cases where, because I don't know of a specific example, but I believe that there are cases where that is the case. But those are a very tiny minority of cases. In the vast majority of cases, I don't think, for example, in the case of, say, rape or incest, that it's justified. It's not justified at all in those cases. But in the case where it affects the life of the mother, you get into a little bit more of a gray area. I don't think that an abortion is ever medically necessary, really, other than those very, very tiny fringe cases.
Okay, let's look at the fringe case then. So let's say that it's something that we can detect and we know, like, where it's not just a guess, like it's as much of a knowing as you're satisfied with, that if you don't terminate the baby's life, then the mother will die. So in that case, what do you say?
So it's a very difficult one, because basically the doctors are in the business of providing care, and so if it's possible to provide care, then that's what the doctor should do, and that extends to the baby. And so in most cases with regards to the life of the mother, and I think probably all cases, the baby can be delivered, and it may not always survive delivery, but it can be delivered. And I think that, for example, with third trimester abortions where termination of the baby occurs first, these are obviously, third trimester is usually less than 5% of the total abortions. But for those 5%, the babies are terminated and then delivered. And I don't think it's necessary to do that in most cases, including in those cases where, for example, the baby is adjudged by the doctors to be unable to survive being delivered, because in some cases the doctors are actually wrong about that. And so, yeah, so that's kind of my position on it, that you should attempt where possible to deliver the baby, or to make sure that the baby is properly implanted or properly cared for, properly incubated, whatever else it might be, and that the mother too receives as much medical care and attention as she can be given as well, so medicines and all the rest of it to ease sickness and fever and all those sorts of things. And
so
when it becomes
but just so if C-section or induced labor will have like a 99.9% chance that she's going to die, you're saying that that's what should be done. They should induce a labor or do a C-section, and then once that baby's out, then give as much care as you can. But her likelihood of dying doesn't affect the terminating of the life of the baby.
Yeah, I think the problem is that it's one of classification. So if delivering the baby in any way leads to the almost certain death of the mother, like whether that's C-section or whatever else, it leads almost definitely to the death of the mother, then you could make the case that that's killing the mother.
Would you?
And so then potentially, yes, because I think that, as I said before, when it comes to saving, making a decision between saving two people, then you obviously have to try and save both if you can. If you can't, you have to make a judgment on which one. Now, if saving one of them requires you to kill the other, then it's the wrong thing to do, I think, with the trolley problem, for example. And so I would err on the side of, if it's necessary to basically kill the mother to deliver the baby, but you can abort the baby to save the mother's life, then there's a contradiction there. And so
do you think it would?
Yeah, it's difficult, but you see where I'm going with that.
Yeah. Do you think it should play out the same way as the two stabbed guys, where if saving either the mother or the baby first gives you a 1% chance of saving the other one, but if saving the other one first gives you a 2% chance of saving the other one, you don't view that mother and that unborn human as either having more value? Whichever one will give you better odds of saving both, you do that.
Yes. You do what's necessary to save both. And in the case where it's not possible to save both, I would compromise to say that the mother, who has both rational control over herself and responsibility for the child, in those very rare circumstances, I would say it's reasonable to say that she has the last word on that.
Oh, interesting. It's almost like an assisted suicide, but in cases where that suicide will help.
It's sort of like turning off life support. The baby is on life support, so to speak. And so in that circumstance, she's withdrawing her support for the baby as a protective measure for herself, and that the alternate to not doing so is death for herself. And that's a guarantee, and there's no way to save both, if you can save both, you should. But if there's no way, it's literally objectively impossible to do that, then begrudgingly, I would say that the mother has the final say. as the party of responsibility in that circumstance.
Interesting. Okay. And so it's
I'll have to
almost
think about it more, but I
right.
think
Yeah.
that's
It
about the
almost
right
feels
thing to do.
like, yeah, it almost feels like location kind of matters. And maybe it does. But like if you had two hypotheticals where somebody that a woman just gave birth to a baby, let's say that baby was born exactly 8 months into pregnancy. Um, and so it's born 1 month early, which it was totally fine. Babies are totally fine a month early. So 8 months into pregnancy, a woman gives birth on day one of 8 months in. And then so she has that baby, they go home. And then you have another scenario where somebody is exactly 8 months pregnant and 8 months day one. Now, in one scenario where they're 8 months pregnant and they go to the hospital and they have the scenario we're talking about where it is impossible to save both. We know this for certain. Do we leave it up to the mother? Okay. And then you got the scenario with the exact same aged fetus that was just born early, and both show up and there's one AI doctor that can only save one. It's impossible to save two. Do those two scenarios look different to you? In both cases, inside that hospital is an AI doctor that knows what they're doing and two humans, and both mothers are the exact same age and both fetuses are the exact same age. Is the idea of having to go through an individual to get to one of the humans a factor, or would both play out identically?
I think they have the same moral worth, and so this is another of those circumstances where the AI can't necessarily make the judgment as to which to provide care. But these are sort of hypotheticals which don't necessarily have any real world application other
Yeah.
than the triage of hospital resources, and it's not really possible to cleanly delineate where service can and can't be given in that way.
Mm.
It's usually to do with time management or funding allocation and things like that. So
Mm.
it's too difficult to say from a human perspective, but from an AI perspective, I don't think that the AI should have a role in determining which, like if the doctor types in the two patients into a comparison and it goes save this one. No, I don't think that
Gotcha.
ought to be the
Okay.
way that AI functions.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. And I love having talks like this because it leads me to adjusting my values and my understandings. Because I personally, I value humans at different ages in different ways. And so even though I value unborn in general more than most people do, I think, I still do value older stages more. Like I value most humans more than 1 and 2 year olds. And
Yeah.
therefore,
Well, I think
yeah.
I think that that's perfectly natural. It's not necessarily an argument in favor of abortion because it's natural to feel a more emotional, sentimental attachment to things which are more to which you have formed an emotional attachment face to face, and so you have that relation or a relational connection to them, and so parents will mourn the loss of a born baby often, or a born child or their adult children more than they would um, mourn the miscarriage or loss of a fetus. The problem
Mm.
is that the fact that they have that emotional reaction does not make the fetus any less human than it was.
Yeah.
So it doesn't change the sort of morality of abortion. It only changes the emotions that are attached to it, which I don't think that emotions are the determining factor for moral value. So
Gotcha. Yeah, no, fair enough. Okay, one last question on abortion, and then we'll hop over to the others, and the others are going to go really quick, I think. But okay,
mhm.
so we imagine, let's imagine a future where a lot of people decide to have their babies grown in a lab. We don't have to go over the ethics of that and the likely concerns with that. But let's just say we have a lab and there's 1,000 eggs were just fertilized, and these are eggs and sperm of people that want to have children, but they decided that they're going to go with this option where it can be incubated in a lab, and then they just show up in 9 months and get their baby. Okay, so there's 1,000 fertilized eggs, and they're kind of in one area. They're in like little droppers or something, and they're going to very soon. They're going to be transferred to the robot uterine wall, and then in this same area, like a 1-year-old toddler that just started learning to walk. They stumble into this area. They're in there. They knock something over. Let's actually not blame the fire on them. I take that back. They're there, and then a fire happens. You have at this further end, you have a 1-year-old. You have at this end 1,000 fertilized eggs. And this is a unique case because this isn't like the hypothetical that I'm sure you've heard where some asshole just fertilizes 1 trillion eggs and then you have to choose, is it bad to kill them because we can't bring them to whatever. This is a little different, and maybe that it'll change your mind on it. But so yeah, you have 1,000 eggs that are wanted and intended on creating, and then you got this 1-year-old toddler, and then the fire's there, and there's no way anybody's going to be able to save anything aside from this one person could run to one end and get the toddler, or to the other end, grab the thing full of the 1,000 eggs, and then run outside. What do you think the right thing to do is? In fact, we can make it more like the doctor thing, where it's not an individual choosing their personal morals. You don't have to imagine it's you. Imagine it's a firefighter that could only save one. And similar to the AI doctor, we want to program them to what we think is best.
Yeah, the right thing to do is to save the toddler. For various reasons, one of which is that the fertilized eggs won't feel pain. And that's a human consideration to make, that in 2 situations where there is a harm inflicted on one that won't be experienced by the other, it's quite a significant material change. You would take the toddler to prevent that fate. However, that doesn't mean that the fertilized eggs you left behind are any less human. Nor if you chose to take the fertilized egg and to say, well, that's only 1 human and they're 1,000, that doesn't make the 1 human less human.
Yeah, that's possibly the coolest answer I've ever heard to that. I've never heard anybody answer that like that. That's awesome. Okay, yeah. So essentially, would it transfer that same way to the 1,000 going all the way up to this first stage of sentience, of being able to feel pain?
Sorry, what do you mean by that, sir?
So let's say sentience is about 12 weeks. There's a lot of evidence showing that it's closer to 12 weeks than the previously thought, like 18 weeks. And there's some form of heart development around 6 weeks, but definitely brain development is around 6 weeks. If the brain development's at 6 weeks, but the sentience hasn't arrived, so there's zero pain that's going to happen at 6 weeks. Instead of talking about fertilized eggs, if you have in some way there's a container that holds 1,000 6-week-old embryos.
Yeah.
Is it the same answer because the sentience isn't reached?
So I think this is not necessarily a question that's governed by morality. It's a subjective decision. So a new way to restate this would be, there are 2 children in that building. Okay, there's little Timmy, and then on the other end of the room is your child. Who do you save?
Oh, my child.
Well, there you go. There you go. So it doesn't matter that Timmy is going to burn. Well, what the firefighter makes the decision based on the likelihood of saving the different pair. He does a triage in that moment. But on the moral level, what would you do in that circumstance? If you're in the circumstance, there are various factors like your emotional connection to the victims, your ability to familiarize yourself with and empathize with the harm that's going to be caused to the person. However, that doesn't change the fundamental fact that the people who are left behind are still people, are still human beings. And so it would be wrong to say it would be wrong to kill them anyway. It'd be wrong to kill one, it'd be wrong to kill the other. And that question of would you save a stranger's child or your own is a perfect illustration of this. You would save your own. Well, is that moral? Is it moral to leave someone else's child behind? Well, the question, the answer is obviously there, isn't it? That it's the right thing to do for you is to save your child, and the right thing to do for another parent is to save theirs. And that's not a question of the humanity of the people.
Yeah.
In the situation.
Well, more so I like to look over like the legality of it, since with abortion, it's trying to figure out, should there be cutoffs? What should there be legally? And so in a society, I don't think it would be ideal if the society decided things based off my wants. Like, obviously, I would prefer a police officer to save my kid over 1,000 other kids at once. I want that trolley car to go in that way. Like, I would press a button that would save my kid over 1 million other kids. And that's probably a good thing. That's probably how humans were able to keep continuing. But then the question,
yeah, I mean, it's not wrong to think like that. I mean, so for example, let's say that you're watching the news and there's a horrible story of a child that's been kidnapped and killed or something, and a lot of parents will think, "Oh, thank God that's not mine." But when you think about that, that's kind of a horrible thing to think. You know, you're sort of grateful that the harm has been inflicted on someone else, but no one's going to say that a parent saying "thank God it's not mine" is doing anything wrong, because of course you'd think "thank God it's not mine." You have an emotional connection to your child, and that's important. But it doesn't mean that what happened to the other person is any less bad. It may be less bad to you from an emotional perspective, but it's not less moral. So.
Yeah. And also it might not even be possible to make a choice in that case. I think a lot of things you can make choices, and other cases you can't. Like for example, like I can't just decide to be religious right now. I just don't feel religious, so I would have to be convinced. And then when you have other things like I feel like I've heard in movies and people talking throughout my life that people talk about like somebody dying for somebody else. And there's plenty of people that would die for many people. There's people that like have jumped on grenades to save their fellow military men and stuff like that. But I try to think of things honestly, and through my entire life, I don't think I've ever thought like I would literally actually jump in front of a bullet for somebody. And
maybe in the leg or something.
What's that?
Maybe in the leg or something like that, but not in not center mass.
Yeah, but with my daughter, I pondered it and I realized I wouldn't be able to choose otherwise. Like it's just something that naturally, like in my head, I've played it out in my head, and it's kind of weird and kind of scary, but kind of cool. I'm glad that I feel this way, that I can't not feel this way. But I've played it out, and who knows what would actually happen. But it's just bizarre to me because I try to be as realistic as possible, and I probably would not do it for my mom. My mom's my favorite person. I would not step in front of a bullet for her, I don't think. But in this case, there's something about when you create offspring that it does something. Do you have kids yet?
Yeah, I've got some.
Okay, cool. You don't have to publicly say that answer, what you would do there. But anyways, okay. I just think it's interesting, the things that kind of aren't choice. We just it's almost programmed within us. But yeah, anyways, yeah, everybody's different. Like not everybody would have the same programming or be convinced the same ways or whatever. But
yeah, okay.
Let me brush over some topics real quick, and then we will we'll hop over to talking about Mr. Trump. Okay, real quick, sex and gender. We're probably going to agree with almost all things related to sex and gender, but I just wanted to ask you two questions. Well, maybe three or four. Do you view, from what you've gathered, do you think it's ideal for a society to view sex and gender as just synonymous words that mean the same thing? Do you see any value in their? Okay.
No, the only distinction I would make is that sex is biological and gender is the behavioral patterns that emerge from sexual expression. So gender, in my understanding, refers essentially to the kind of set of collective attitudes and temperaments and behaviors that women exhibit. So, for example, or men exhibit. So, to be a man is to be associated with a set of behaviors. So, to be a man is to be associated with, say, more aggression.
Okay.
And to be a woman is to be associated with more negative emotion, like
Mm.
in the big five traits. And so they're not exactly the same, but they are causally linked. So sex causally creates gender, and that includes people who fall out of the, let's say, the traditional sort of range of gender expression. So, for example, you can have more masculine females, you can have more feminine males, but they're just data points in the pattern of gender. Does that make sense?
Interesting. Yeah, no, it does. It does. And I have never been convinced that we should use gender in that way that you've described. It does make sense. Like to me, well, it's funny. I've always assumed that gender was created as soon as people referred to the act of having sex with the word sex. That all of a sudden gender is now the word used, so people don't have to say what's your sex. And then I was watching something recently, and it turns out that actually is the reasoning that's why gender came into things. And so it seems like for most of English speaking history, gender and sex are synonymous, and not that that needs to stay that way, but I think that's probably what's best, because I've never been convinced that we need um, anything that people use the word gender for outside of being synonymous with sex. I've never been convinced that we need that. I think we can
Yeah.
talk about masculine and feminine and all the different traits and connect them with sex, gender, which I view are the same thing. And
Yeah.
we can talk about these different things, like all the things you just said, without saying that gender is the thing you said. I'm not saying you should change your mind on that connection, but I just haven't been convinced that it should be like, okay, sex is male and female, and gender refers to and a bunch of other things, but
That's
also
how I conceptualize it. Yeah, that's just how
okay.
I conceptualize it. So I don't see transgenderism. I don't see that as a gender. I see that essentially the term that I came up with was essentially psychological identity. So you have your own psychological identity, your association with yourself, how you recognize yourself in the world. And there are people who very strongly, and I would say through the fault of either social or sort of um, what would you say, cognitive sort of mental problems, associate strongly, compulsively with, and pathologically with the set of traits that are associated with the opposite expression. So for men, that would be associating with femininity and vice versa. But very
Mhm.
often, in my experience, the people who claim association with the opposite gender very often don't necessarily embody those traits. They very often embody the traits of the gender that they actually are. That's just my
Gotcha.
opinion, and we don't need to go
Yeah.
further into that. But that's
Yeah,
my
yeah.
conception of it so
No,
far.
it's fine. I do have one question that will go into that. But before I do
Mm-hmm.
that, real quick, I just want to say, do you view the word like okay? So first of all, sex and gender are somewhat the same thing, but so if male is one of two options for sex, would you view man as one of two options for gender,
Yeah,
or okay, because here's the thing where I think people get there's a little hiccup, and I just came across this recently, and I think it's important that we figure out the best way to use our words, and I like to come to the truth with everything, so it's really cool to figure out where things go wrong, and I think the problem with viewing man or woman as a sex or gender is that I like to view it more as a term for stages of humans based on sex gender. So because we have like if we were to view it as a gender, then I think we'd also have to view boy as a gender and girl as a gender. And these things mean things like man means adult human male. And so if man is a gender and woman is a gender, and like, is lady a gender? Is lady might be synonymous with woman, but then you have girl and then you have boy, and this means something different with age. So I think it might be important to say we don't only have two genders, man and woman. We can say we have two sexes and genders, and like, so the two genders are male and female. The two sexes are male and female. If those are synonymous, but then we have
but you can use man and
yeah.
woman interchangeably with male and female.
Well, in a sense, you can't. I mean, you can.
I would.
But they're not perfectly linked, because not all males are men. Because some males are boys.
Oh, yeah, but obviously it's a descriptive, so you're referring obviously to a man as in an adult male. But yeah.
What
I mean is that boy and man are synonymous with male, within a particular sort of range of age. That's
Which we do with almost all animals, anyways. Because you have like a hen and a rooster, and then you have most animals have like their child form. Although the child form of most animals, I don't think we separate them by sex, which is kind of interesting. I think you have like goats, it's like called a kid, and then in others it's a cub, and it's kind of interesting. Okay,
I don't think it really matters though. It doesn't change the argument about whether transgenderism as an ideology is correct. And generally speaking, are they really, between male and female kids, are they really the significant? Well, I don't know. I won't go further. I was going to say, are there really significant behavioral differences that require separate nomenclature? But I don't know, so I'll put that to one side. But
gotcha.
There are clear significant differences between boys and girls and men and women. And so the separate nomenclature is actually important. So that's my view. And before we move on from the trans thing, by the way, I made a note. I actually listened to all of your and Eric's recent podcast, and I just wanted to pick up on one thing, because he told you something and I want to correct it.
Okay.
So he told you that the decision to outlaw or suspend gender identity disorder services and puberty blockers is a political decision. And he specifically said Sweden and Britain. And I'm from Britain, so I would like to say that our suspension of those services was not political. It was actually the result of an independent review that was done into our gender identity disorder service, which we called GIDS. And it was something called the CAS review. And you can go online and you can find the full report of the CAS review. But I will just, I got it up on my computer ready so that you know what the reality of this is. So here were some quotes from the overview of key findings from the CAS review. So one of the things that it basically said was that the gender identity service was being provided without suitable quality controls. So what that means in practice is that they were adopting affirmation as the default position with no evidence of long-term positive outcomes to back up the care that was being provided. So, for example, just to find a particular part 4 says, while a considerable amount of research has been published in this field, systematic evidence reviews demonstrated poor quality of published studies, meaning there is no reliable evidence base upon which to make clinical decisions in gender. The strength of the evidence base on the care of children is misrepresented and overstated. The rationale for early puberty suppression remains unclear, with weak evidence regarding the impact on gender dysphoria. The effect on cognitive psychosexual development remains unknown. And it goes on to say that there is no long-term data to support desistance of feelings of gender dysphoria after care. So that's why gender identity care was suspended in the UK. It was not political. It was because it was rubbish.
Yeah. Gotcha. Well, thank you for reading that. Yeah, no, it's pretty wild. Like, obviously, I'm no expert in this field. I don't, I could be wrong, but nothing seems more clear to me in the world probably than the silliness of the claim that puberty blockers are reversible. That like
Yes,
it blows
absurd.
my mind. It like I get the idea of somebody thinking I care so much about this thing, some people might kill themselves, so I think it's fine to do. That's fine. I strongly disagree with it, but for somebody to think that if you pause puberty without pausing life, if somebody's getting older, then no, if you take away the puberty blockers, that entire chunk of time that they were on them, they won't get that amount of puberty back.
No.
Right? Like that's
Yeah, no, they
insane.
won't. They won't, and it's well. Um, I'd say it's well evidenced that that's not the case. One of the major oppositions to puberty blockers is the fact that it causes sterilization.
Hmm.
The fact that it causes sterilization. So that's not a reversible problem, is it?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and even if
So,
something
so
is
yeah,
reversible, it's still a problem, like the bone density
yeah,
problem. It's like,
exactly.
sure, you could reverse it.
Osteoporosis and yeah.
Yeah. But
Exactly. It's kind
what
of
you
like you
can't
have a
do.
bucket with a hole in it and a tap
Hmm.
that's running into the top of the bucket that's filling up the bucket at the exact rate that the bucket is emptying out of the hole. And then you turn off the tap for 10 seconds and then turn it back on. The bucket is never going to be as full as it was when you
Hmm.
turn the tap off.
Yeah.
It's just a fact, and that is exactly how it works. Obviously, that's a silly analogy, but that's exactly how it works in relation to this. That they will never recover the lost benefits that proper puberty would have given them.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah, it's insane to me. I mean, obviously, there's a lot I would need to learn about how the drug affects everything, which I don't know. But it's just beyond certain that that those years don't come back. You don't experience puberty after a certain point. Not exactly an age that we humans give, but like somewhere around like 18 on, you don't experience puberty again. So if you were on puberty blockers, let's say from 14 to 18, and then you go off them, the idea of viewing it as reversible means nothing. You can reverse that you're on them. You could say whatever puberty blockers are, they're in you. And then when they're out of you, they're out of you. But that 4 years, you will never have a 4 years of human life where your body is changing and your hormones are changing. It's just
Yeah,
I
I
cannot
suppose
believe
it's
how
the
popular of a
one
thought it
case
was.
the one case you could make is essentially that it may technically one day be possible to, through medical intervention, force the body to go through that procedure, but it's never going to be
Mm.
natural, and it's I think always you're interrupting with the natural rhythms of the body. It's always going to cause some problems that just can't be undone easily.
Hmm. Yeah, and timing wise, it's always going to be at a stage that I hope we all agree to not let humans make choices. It's always going to correlate with puberty, because that's what we're talking about is puberty. And therefore, with puberty, that will never be an age that we say this is when this person should make this decision. This is when this human should be able to get a boob job or a nose job or have their leg cut off or whatever, get a tattoo.
Yeah,
Now, sure, there are some states where you can get a tattoo at like 16 or 17 with a parent's permission or whatever, and that we can argue about if that should be or shouldn't be. I would say it probably shouldn't be, but this will never be a fixable issue because I don't think anybody ever that has not gone through puberty should be able to make life altering choices. And yeah, so anyways, I'm glad that your country figured it out, and I'm glad that
for now.
most countries figured it
For now.
out. Right? Yeah, yeah. You
Well,
never
we have
know.
a landslide left-wing government, so the
Mm.
likelihood of this being put back into place eventually
Well,
is relatively high, but we'll see.
yeah, in general, I view left leaning people as pretty empathetic, and I think in some cases There's probably politicians that are doing it for certain reasons, for money and power and all these different things. But I think people care about looking empathetic when they are empathetic. I think it's both. I think you're empathetic, and so you want to make sure you're not viewed as not empathetic. And so if you're unsure about something and convinced by the powers that be that this is a good thing, then you're on board. But I truly think that when it's fully understood how harmful it is, that most left-leaning people would go like, oh, no, 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 no. I want to support trans people in any way possible, but not this harmful one. And we are experiencing this for the first time ever in the past 10 years, like what trans even is in any real way. And so I think in our lifetimes, we'll see a huge shift as we see people that get surgeries that regret it and all this kind of stuff in the next 10, 20 years. And when we see the downfall, I don't think it'll be a matter of left or right leaning governments, but yeah.
I think so. But we'll have to be proven right on that. How much more time can I squeeze out of you?
Oh, I'll stick around for a bit longer than I had planned because I definitely wanted to get into some of the Trump talk. But let me finish up one last thing.
I'd also like to chat about immigration if you want, because there was something you said in a previous in the ARIC thing that I want to try to convince you on. Oh, cool, but we'll move on to that in a bit.
Yeah, I'll guarantee that I'll save time for that. Okay, so for sex and gender, the last thing, this is where I'm a little torn. So I'm currently writing a paper of sorts on this. And I think there are definitely areas where we need to segregate based on sex and not what people refer to as gender. And that would be something like prisons and sports, although that's not a legal thing. That's just more like what I think would be ideal. But then, you got locker rooms, you got a handful of different homeless shelters. I think it's important to not force homeless women to be in a sleeping area with homeless men. One thing I'm a little torn on, and I can't get over this hiccup, is the idea of bathrooms. I sympathize with the idea of women not having to worry about if somebody with a penis is going in their bathroom. But I can't get over the fact that I can't get this out of my head. You know who Blair White is, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I cannot come up with a workaround excluding the idea of there being unisex bathrooms. But if every public place had a male and female bathroom, I just can't figure this out where people that look like Blair White that we would say legally you have to go into the men's bathroom and not the women's. So what do you think?
I haven't given it much consideration, to be honest. My default position is that men should go into the men's room and women should go into the women's room. I think that in the case of someone like Blair White, who quite clearly looks female, it would be on a case-by-case basis that if Blair was to go into a woman's bathroom, in the majority of cases, probably wouldn't be noticed. And so a lot of this is sort of an emergent phenomenon, which is that if you look like you can be there, then you won't get challenged. And if you won't get challenged and nothing happens, then there's no problem. And then if you end up doing something to the women in the bathroom because you are a predator or whatever, then you should be dealt with in the best way that you can be. It's a difficult issue, but I still do think that there should be some recognition of segregation, that generally single gender toilets should not necessarily be widely adopted. I think that women and girls do have certain needs, either safety or comfort, to be away from women in those spaces and away from men in those spaces, whether it's for safety or whatever. I think that's a good starting point. At least we can say that, no, just because you say you're female does not necessarily mean that you get to use those spaces. How you work that out I don't know. It could be case by case. It could be individual places get to decide for themselves. How would public buildings deal with that situation? I don't know. I haven't considered it fully, but the starting point should be that women should have separate spaces, particularly in vulnerable situations like that. So.
Yeah, and it's definitely tricky because you got the Blair White situation, which would be tricky. Where if I agree with you that people that are so passing like that would go unnoticed, but if there was a law in that city that said if you're born male, you can't go in there, and then Blair White, who normally would pass anywhere, if she went in there and then somebody said, "Oh, that's a man," and then because of the fame, it's obvious that they would know, and then that the idea that she could get jail time would be a bummer. But then you got the other end of it where there are women that might look so unattractive that they look like a man or whatever, that person would be stopped and say, "Hey, are you going into the right bathroom?" And then that's wildly offensive. But I think you're right. It really would come down to, are we experiencing issues here? And when we are, do we crack down on it? And I just have a hard time coming up with an answer.
I mean, you should crack down. Like if someone commits a sexual assault or whatever, they should be punished whether they're going into one bathroom or the other. So that's not necessarily an issue. We already have laws about that. I suppose the issue is one of safety, and as a general societal rule, it's safer for women to have their own private spaces when it comes to situations like that. And so that should be the default position, in my view. You can deal with the side fringe cases like Blair White, for example, separately, and maybe when the harm emerges. But it's difficult. It's difficult to say. You could argue, for example, that Blair White is potentially at risk. For example, if Blair was to commit a crime, then and be put into a male prison, like they're going to get literally fucked.
Right.
That's not good. So maybe separate facilities or something like that could be a way around it. But
I am thoroughly convinced that there should be separate branches for trans people in prison. And yeah, we can go over that at a separate time. I wanted to comment. Somebody put in the comments, okay, hold up. People aren't on puberty blockers that long, though. They're probably referring to my example of from 14 to 18. So they're saying they're not on there 4 years. I think 4 years is the standard, but maybe it's 2 years. But I will state that my argument would be any amount for any second, and not just because I have a stance against trans or anything like that. I would say, I don't know if puberty blockers are like a shot or a pill or whatever. I don't know the exact details on it. I just know the logical side of it that obviously I could be wrong about. But if you take a pill, let's say you have to take a pill every 6 months or every 1 month or whatever, and you're only going to be on it for like 2 years. But even if you just take one pill, let's say you even take it daily. You take it daily and it only affects you for 1 day. There will be 1 day that puberty would have done a certain thing that it is stopped from doing. So my argument would be, unless I'm missing something, if somebody let's do weeks. There's 52 weeks in a year. So let's say for age 12 that somebody would normally be going through puberty for all of age 12, and they would take a pill every week for 52 weeks. For that year to block their puberty. If they took it for the first week of January, then they stopped. I don't think that the amount of puberty they would go through in that year would still take place, and that first week that was prevented just got added to the second week, and you double the puberty you're going through on the second week, and then the rest is like normal.
There'll be some residual impacts. And also, I don't necessarily think although that is a relevant consideration, the right consideration, I think, I'm going to read another line from the CAS review. It says here, one of the findings of the CAS review was that, quote, clinicians are unable to determine with any certainty which children will go on to have an enduring trans identity. So the question here is, do puberty blockers actually lead to the desistance of dysphoric feelings? And even if they do, will they also accommodate for, though, the majority of children with dysphoric feelings who revert back to a more standard gender expression? And the answer is we don't know. There's no evidence for it. So the idea, and there's no way to collect the evidence for it because you can't predict the future. So it's not possible, to this person who's commented, it's not possible to provide puberty blockers to children on the basis of desisting a gender identity disorder when you don't know if that gender identity, you can't know if that gender identity disorder is going to continue, and you haven't proven that puberty blockers even help with the desistance for long-term chronic cases.
Yeah.
And in any case, I would add, and an even more strong case, transgenderism as a concept, as an ideology, is wrong. A male can't be female and a female can't be male, in my view. And so, and I think that's strongly supported by the evidence that we have. And so my tendency would be to say that the people who claim to be of the opposite sex, if they're adults, are free to do what they want. They can identify as whatever they want. However, as a matter of care, as a matter of biological and psychological fact, this person who thinks that has something wrong with them, has a condition, has a mental condition which needs treatment, which needs care, which needs therapy, which needs counseling, which needs even potentially some kind of medical mental drug intervention. They don't need affirmation because their condition is telling them something about themselves which is not true. That would be my hard line stance. But even taking that away and just saying, okay, transgenderism as an ideology is right and that people do feel this way, there's no way, I'll say again, there is no way to predict which children will desist naturally, and there is no evidence whatsoever that puberty blockers desist the feelings of dysphoria for those who genuinely have a chronic condition.
Gotcha.
So you can't do it either way. You can't do it.
The person that asked that question initially, they're wondering what the paper is that you're citing, and I'll put it. If you can send it to me later, I'll put it in the description of this video. But also, if you want to let them know what it is and what the name of it is.
Sure. So, and then we'll move on to other stuff. But you can, if you just Google the CAST review. You can find it at cas.independent-review.uk. So this was an independent review commissioned by the UK government into NHS. That's NHS is the National Health Service. It's the UK's universal healthcare system. And they run something called GIDS, which is the Gender Identity Disorder Service. And so basically, they reviewed the NHS's, so our socialized universal healthcare model. They reviewed the provision of gender affirming care through GIDS, and the findings basically led to GIDS being suspended with an urgent review into the quality controls of that service because it found that there was significant areas in which the evidence for the clinical diagnoses was lacking.
Okay, they said spelled CAST, or am I mishearing?
CASS.
Okay, CASS. Okay, cool. Well, thank you for that. Okay, let me do like rapid fire through these last couple really quick. So this is the challenge that I'm having the hardest time with when it comes to the idea of a minor deciding if they want to do like top surgery or something like that, which I'm not in favor of, but it makes me wonder a few different ideas. So if somebody is in a car wreck, let's say a minor, they're in a car wreck and their face gets deformed. But there's not going to be any physical, or there's not going to be any health issues. They just are now deformed from what they were. Would you say that if there's not going to be any health issues, that it would be reasonable to let them choose to have surgery done to fix their face?
Yes, because it's reconstructive, not destructive.
Okay, and that's usually my go-to answer there. Now, reconstructive to what it was.
Yes, it was
Okay,
reconstruct. I mean, obviously, if they say, "Can you make me even more handsome?" then
yeah.
you can do that too, I suppose. But
The reason I ask to what it was is to make sure you're not referring to what sort of the ideal is, because then what if you have a case where somebody's born with a deformed face, and because of technology we can fix that face to fix it to kind of what we think of people looking like, let's say of that gender or whatever. Not that
well,
faces are
I
really
would
gendered.
argue that I would argue that's still reconstructed because this person clearly, like the Elephant Man, for example, there's clearly
Mhm.
something wrong with him.
Gotcha.
So
Okay.
you're fixing what is wrong, and when you're fixing what is wrong, it's reconstructed. But when you're operating on perfectly healthy body parts for no
Okay.
reason, or
Yeah, yeah.
for cosmetic reasons, or for subjective uh, subjective psychological reasons,
Yeah. Would you say the
then you
same
have a
for
problem, I think,
okay.
with that.
Yeah, and I think I mostly agree. I just like to challenge myself. I like to come up with the best steelman arguments I can. Would you say the same thing for like a benign tumor?
What, to remove it?
Yeah. Like, so it's
Yeah,
in them, it's not going to harm them. Let's say it's making a lump show up. They don't like the look of that lump, but that, that's how they were born. They were born with this thing. And is the
yeah,
reason to remove it
yeah,
is that we know it's not necessary?
yeah. You can be able to do that. I mean, these are things which yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah, I would say it's equivalent to basically popping a spot, isn't it? Like a
To
spot
whatting?
pops open to popping a spot
Oh,
or a
gotcha.
blackhead or something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah.
If it's something which shouldn't be there or that pops up as a because
Okay.
of the buildup of whatever in your skin, or in that case because a benign tumor grows as these do, and I don't see a
Mhm.
problem with that.
Gotcha. Well, okay, so would this change if we kind of evolved to have these benign tumors to where 80% of humans now are born with these benign tumors? They're not going to hurt anybody, but the majority are born with it. Would we then say when you're an adult, you can have it out? Or would we say there's no need for it, so it's fine to choose either way?
Um, I don't know. I'd have to consider. I mean, the example I'm thinking of is the appendix, for example,
Hmm.
would be a close approximation, which is the appendix, you don't need it, but there is a justification to remove it preemptively because it can burst and then that causes problems. But your question, is it okay to remove? As a general rule, I haven't thought about this particular thing deeply, but as a general rule, I think it's probably wrong to um, provide non non reconstructive cosmetic surgery to children.
Okay, fair, and I'm pretty sure I agree. Which takes us into our last topic before immigration, circumcision. I don't know if we've ever talked about this. I agree with almost everything that we have talked about so far. Although, just real quick, I'll point out, and we'll talk about it at a future date. My current stance on abortion is a legal cutoff at 12 weeks for sentience reasons. I do see the argument for caring for before 12 weeks, but personally, I'm at a place where I want to allow legally people to abort before 12 weeks. But I agree with almost
I
everything
used
that
to be
we've.
there.
Okay.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
used to
and
be
I
there.
could change. We all change around. I love hearing good arguments and whatnot. So I just want to point out we agree on most of these things, and I think
Hmm.
going from what you just said about the surgery with the tumor and all that kind of stuff on children, I want to get to circumcision because I assume for some random reason that you're accepting of circumcision.
Nope.
Oh, perfect. Okay,
Complete no.
awesome.
No.
Okay, awesome.
Absolutely not.
I okay, cool, awesome, good. We don't even have to go into it any further. I was going to compare that to tattoos, and we're just like
Yeah.
awesome. Somebody
There you
wrote.
go. Well, we agree on everything because you're very intelligent and I'm very right about everything. So we kind of coming together.
Awesome. Okay, the person that asked about the paper you were reading, they were curious to hear our thoughts on a thing, and they said thoughts on breast reduction for minors, not transgender reasons, like she's having back problems, and the doctor have predicted that she will have back problems later on. I definitely have a stance on this, but I want to hear yours first, and then I'll respond.
It's another thing I've not really considered.
Okay. Well, I can say mine, and you can let me know.
Well, potentially that would fall into the, as I said, about the preventative, like with the appendix. If you know for a fact that, you don't know for a fact, but if you can suspect with a reasonable degree of certainty that the appendix, but not even that, if the appendix presents a risk and provides no benefit, then it's not necessarily wrong for you to remove it, although that becomes questionable in the case of a child. In the case of a child with regards to the breast reduction, again, I think you would have to be more careful when applying that to a child, though there's no reason necessarily why an adult couldn't have that be done to them. And yeah, I'd have to think about it. I don't know.
As far as a second ago, when you said that you're right about everything, your wife is in the chat right now, and she said, "Hi, I'm his wife listening on, and I can confirm he's not always right about everything." With a ha ha ha. So we got to bring her on sometime. Okay. So what I'll say is very similar to what you said with the breast reduction is, if somebody had some mental disorder where they felt like they would feel better without an arm, we're not going to let a child choose to cut their arm off. But if they get in a car wreck and the best medical attention to give them is to amputate that arm to save them, then we do amputate the arm. Same thing with something like this, where somebody wants a breast reduction, whether they want it for looks, to make smaller breasts that they like the look of, or to remove to make it look like a man chest, or for their back pain or whatever. I think we would just have to look at the actual health. We'd have to look at, what do we know about this size of chest and this size of person and a spine and what's likely going to happen. And I don't know the exact details of when we should intervene. But yeah, if something is going to cause a harm, we intervene and fix that harm. But we don't allow for extra fun choices. We just do it for the
there's gray areas when it.
I just want to say real quick. So if it was like a case where they were the largest breasts ever that were going to harm the back, we would remove as much as we need to remove to restore to what would be there to not harm a back. If they wanted it all gone for trans reasons, and they also had the back issue that we wanted to help with, I don't think we should, while we're in there, do a little extra of what they want. It would be, they do no harm. They remove the amount to remove to make them the same person they are without the harm, but not like, we're going to remove some anyway, so we'll remove it all for you.
Yeah. I'd have to think about it. But yeah, I see what you're saying. I mean, but as it pertains to children, I would err on the side of not doing anything unless it was specifically medically necessary. You wouldn't, for example, on the other side of things, say, have a mother whose 12-year-old appears not to be developing breasts, to say, well, I want her to get a good man, so let's go and get a boob job. No. Yeah. So the same might apply. Well, her boobs might be too big. Let's get them reduced. I think you have to be a bit careful there. When they're an adult, then you can have other considerations. You do make a good point, which is that should it be legal for care providers to do things which are purely destructive? Like if I go into the doctor and say, this doesn't feel like my arm, can you get rid of it? Can they just chop it off? Well, no, actually, that person who did that would have something wrong with them. And so if someone goes in and says, parts of my body don't feel like me, I need to get rid of them, that's a candidate for therapy, not a candidate for surgery, I think. So could the law intervene? Potentially, yeah.
I
I
personally
could be
think
convinced.
I personally think that adults should be able to do whatever they want, and if somebody is willing to do the surgery, that's fine. The only cases that I have concern is when it's going to affect taxpayers. There was a case where a lady didn't want to see, so she wanted to like blind herself. And then there's arms and legs. If you are going to request a surgery done and it's going to make you become disabled, and therefore
Should
because of that choice it's going to make the government take taxes from people to pay for your living, I don't think that's reasonable. But if it's just something like if somebody wants, in the same sense that somebody can cover their face in tattoos, if somebody wanted to cut their ears off, just like the outer ear, it's kind of wild. Maybe there
I
should be
would
a lot
say
of
that
therapy, but
certain things are evidence of a fractured mental state, though. Like the person
okay.
who poked their eyes out. Do you think they should have done that?
Um, I mean, I guess I don't have a thought on what they should or shouldn't have done. I don't think it's
Do you
best.
think it's
Yeah.
do you think it's a healthy self-expression to poke your own eyes out?
A healthy self-expression. No, I mean, I guess I'd say no.
Okay,
But that's only because
so
of my
I
desire
would,
to see.
although I've not although I've not considered it in great detail, I would again, I keep saying erring on the side, but I'd err on the side of people who do things like that are clearly not well. And
Mhm.
again, harking back right to the start of the conversation where we talked about how a society should be structured and how we make extra considerations for the vulnerable. When people are engaged in self-destructive acts, even as adults, we can make an assessment whether that person is fit to judge. And there used to be, and not always well run, but there used to be institutions where people would be institutionalized, and obviously they were in some cases badly run, but there are still facilities where people are sectioned and kept under surveillance for their own good. And so I would say that I would be open to the suggestion that people who were, say, wanting to remove a limb or something like that would be treated with, that would be a red flag from a medical perspective to say
Yeah.
this person needs a certain type of mental care,
Mhm.
mental intervention, not affirmation. The person who poked her eyes out should not have been affirmed for poking her eyes out. She should have been supported into a more healthy state of mind.
Yeah, no, I agree. And if you couldn't reach that more healthy state of mind, then you would just be prevented from being an extreme burden on society. You go into a home of sorts, and the most money that's going to be spent on you is going to be the least amount necessary. I do
Well,
not
yeah, I
think
mean,
tax dollars should be getting.
possibly that, but yeah, possibly that. But as a basic level, um, if as a basic level, it should not be provided for with medical insurance and or on universal socialized medicine. So, for example, if someone goes in and goes, "I'm a man and I think I'm a woman," I wouldn't recommend transgender care, as they call it, as an option. The same as if that woman came into the NHS and said, "These eyes don't feel like me. I want to be blind." I would not
Mm.
expect ever for the doctors to go, "All right, Ward 3, get the forks out, lads."
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't think
for
so.
sure.
Yeah.
But here's where we might disagree. I I think a woman that has small breasts that wants to have bigger breasts to impress men, or a woman that has breasts that wants to remove the breasts because they feel like they would look better looking like a man chest or whatever. I would say that one of those more likely has what I would call some form of mental problem more than the other, but I don't view those as either being more right or wrong than the other. I just view them as actions people are taking based on their perceptions of the world. Like it's sad to me that somebody feels like they need to get a boob job, and it's no judgment if people have them. They might be great people. Like I don't think it's good to drink alcohol, but I think you're a great person. And and like so I don't. There's a lot of things that I might think aren't best to do for our health, or they're not thinking straight if they're doing this action. But you know what I mean. So how would you compare those? A 25-year-old getting a boob job or getting a breast gone? Why are they super different from each other?
Um, well, it depends on. I guess they're not really as a cosmetic factor, and that's why I say there's obviously a consideration to be made, and it's not something that I've really thought about. But yeah, I suppose someone who's getting a boob increase and who's getting a boob reduction, purely for cosmetic reasons, basically in the same category, and so you know, yeah, I'd have to think about it.
Gotcha. Okay. You can tell me if you don't want to get too personal into this at all, but if your wife comes home tomorrow and says she really badly wants to get a boob job, what are you going to do if she does it without you? No, I mean, like, no, don't answer that. Yeah, it's just kind of, I don't know where exactly I was going to go with the conversation, but like, is there any amount of like what it would mean to her that you could imagine? Can you imagine a thing she could say that would make you go like, I'm not in favor of this, but I support your decision? Or is it like everything within your power, you're going to try to talk her out of this?
Well, yeah, I mean, in marriage, once you're in a marriage, essentially you have a certain level. It's kind of the Michael Knowles thing, and once you're in a marriage, you have a certain say over the decisions that your partner makes. And so, I wouldn't get a tattoo, for example, without consulting her. I've got one, but we're married. If I decided to get a face tattoo, it's not my body, my choice. I'm married. I have a wife to consider, and I'm not just saying that because she's listening.
I completely agree with that, and I don't think not that either gender should have say over another person or whatever. But yeah, the idea of like you go into this thing where you are, yeah, you're two people figuring things out together. I agree. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, I think we covered a lot of good ground in all of that, and I'm so happy to hear that you're anti-circumcision. That's awesome. I think that needs to change a lot. How big of a deal is that in the UK? So here, it used to be like so much the majority of people were circumcised, and now, from my understanding, it's like current babies being born in the past like 5 years. It's like a 50-50, or maybe even leaning towards like 55% are not being circumcised anymore.
All I'll say, because I don't know too much on the subject, and I don't want to take up too much of your time, because we've got other things to go over. But what I will say is I've found it quite weird in the last few years, because the UK has a notable Muslim population. We've had a scandal in recent years with female genital mutilation, so cutting the clitoris off young girls. And all I'll say is that I found it strange that there is such concern over that, but apparently no concern for the males who have effectively the same thing done to them. And that's a conversation that the UK just doesn't have, basically. Yeah. But that's just my 2 cents on it. I think it's absurd that we don't think about it. Do you find that more people are switching camps on if male circumcision should be done or not, like amongst your friends? And it's just not an issue. It's just not an issue. People just don't talk about it. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, so let's go ahead and hop over to, well, we kind of did a little bit with the Muslim thing, but immigration. What's going on in the UK with immigration?
Nothing good is essentially the answer to that question. So I did, as I said, I listened to your podcast with Eric, and he smoothed over some of the concerns that I would express, for example, and suggested that the most people who have concerns about this have some kind of pathology, essentially, or fear. I can tell you, as someone whose country has had a disproportionate number of migrants come in recent years, and I would describe them as hostile. It is by no means an irrational fear. It's actually a very reasonable fear to have, to not wish for a large number of people from elsewhere with whom you have little in common to be coming into the country. And I would the first thing that I would say is that in Britain we have voted specifically on numerous occasions for immigration to be reduced. So we had conservative governments from 2010, 2015, 2017, 2019, those were the elections, who campaigned on a manifesto promise to reduce immigration either to the tens of thousands or significantly. We also had a referendum in 2016, the Brexit referendum, the number one issue of which was the issue of immigration. And there were certain groups, prominent groups like Nigel Farage's group and UKIP, that were campaigning to reduce immigration to tens of thousands, and that referendum passed. And despite voting in those 5 separate years on clear and explicit promises to reduce immigration, the population of this country had been completely ignored. Okay, so throughout the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, immigration in this country was running at approximately 30 to, at the most, 50,000. Last year, conservative estimates put it at about 700,000 per year. And about 60,000 of those per year are fighting age Muslim men who have sailed over from France on rubber dinghies, arrived on the shores of the UK, halfway across, thrown their passports and mobile phones and any other identifying information into the sea, have landed on the shores of Britain, and have just disappeared into the country. And we now have a situation in which probably somewhere between 200 and 400,000 fighting age Muslim men are in the country, and we have mostly no idea who they are, why they're here, where they are, or what they're doing. That's the situation in the UK. Okay, and
well, I want to ask you
there are far more issues than just numbers that have arisen from this situation.
Yeah, I want to ask you a few things about some of those details, but before I do that, I want to check on a value element here. This might seem like a pointless question, but it pops into my mind. Is your concern more so with the idea of these being people that in their ideal society would want something like Sharia law? Or is it just blanketly the idea that you view the UK's values being formed and continuing to be Christian values of sorts, and that you wouldn't even want Muslims who don't want Sharia law to be there?
Well, I would say that I would object to it whether it was half a million Polish people or 500,000 Iranians, for example.
Okay. So just more.
I would object to it in either way. However, I will say that I am more acutely concerned about the introduction of Muslim immigrants into the UK than any other category, for the simple reason that, at least in my country, and I understand in several others like Sweden, for example, Germany, the Netherlands, it is the Muslim populations which are responsible for some of the more heinous problems that have emerged. And on a basic kind of principle level, I think that the country that you live in should basically remain the country that you live in, and that there is a kind of fabric to your society that you grow up in, that you recognize, that you have a right to recognize and a right to experience. And if you have too many people coming in, that dilutes the experience that you can have with your own country. And I think that integration is not possible when too many people come in. People don't have any sort of incentive to integrate when large numbers of their own community are also coming in too, because people tend to coalesce together, which is a natural thing to do. I mean, if you're from, I don't know, Kuwait, and 100 people from Kuwait also come with you, you have familiar ties to those people. You're going to want to spend more time with those people. There's nothing wrong with that. The problem is that in doing so, in having such large numbers, literally millions and millions and millions of people, you dilute the host nation's sense of its own identity, the recognition that people have on the streets for each other and things like that. This is very important, I think, and that is what's happening to the UK at the moment.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and there's also such a huge difference between somebody that comes in legally and gets citizenship versus illegally. This popped into my mind too. Do you think people that that get citizenship should have to wait a certain amount of time after having citizenship to be able to vote?
I don't know. Actually, I'll have to think about that.
It just popped into my mind because like that's kind of my biggest concern when it comes to immigration would be people having different values. So here in the US, you know, we have the Constitution, we have our focus on like freedom of speech, which I believe we have a better version of that than any other country. I believe in your country, if you make video jokes about the Holocaust, you could be dragged to jail and stuff like that.
Yep.
So we're pretty good
far
on
less worse than that.
Yeah. And so if you bring in any group of people, it doesn't matter if it's Muslim or whatever, if you bring in like 1 million people that all disagree with a value that our country has, and then they're getting voting power, it could drastically, in not a good way, I would say, affect how the country works. Whereas somebody that has different values like that, if they come over legally, they get citizenship, and then after receiving citizenship, you wait approximately, I don't know, 2 years, 4 years, 5 years. And then at that point, your citizenship includes being able to vote. Then
I would make citizenship. I would make citizenship harder to acquire, but once you've acquired it, you essentially get the same rights as everyone else. I think that's that's the way around I would do it.
Gotcha. Okay, so so you talked about people coming in on boats and pouring in that do not have citizenship. Is there a large amount of people gaining citizenship that you think is too much, or is your biggest concern the illegal ones that don't have citizenship yet?
No, so the illegal ones represent a relatively small minority, somewhere between about 5 and 15% of the known numbers that we have, and very often are either allowed to stay or not deported. So this is a critical issue. But the numbers in general are too high. There's a large number of people who come in on working visas, citizenships and asylum, there are student visas, and there are obviously the illegal migrants who are then processed after years and years and years. And even when they're processed and told to go home, they don't go home. And when they're issued deportation orders, they don't go home. And so the whole thing is too much. The whole thing is too much. And I would say that we're not being selective enough. And like I said, problems have emerged from this. Eric and I did the abortion debate, as you remember, we had a small conversation off air afterwards in which I raised that there had been a number of sexual assaults on underage girls by predominantly Pakistani Muslim men. And the number of Pakistani Muslim men who had done this numbered in the hundreds, if not thousands. And that the girls that had been affected by this numbered in the thousands, if not tens of thousands. And that this had been happening for between 2 and 3 decades in full knowledge of the local authorities in places like Rotherham, in Rochdale, in Bradford, in Hull, and places like this. And I remember distinctly that Eric told me in that conversation that we had that this did not happen, that this was overblown. I can assure you that it is not overblown. Those numbers are accurate. And that is what has happened to the native population of this country as a result of a lax and overburdensome immigration system.
Now,
and that's just one issue.
Are the numbers based on reporting of the person it happened to, or the numbers based on catching people? Like, how do those?
So there are criminal cases going through the courts now in which hundreds have been convicted of things such as peddling drugs and alcohol to underage girls, trafficking them across the country, the kinds of sexual activities that may get your channel struck if I say them out loud.
Gotcha. If
Um,
an
and this has happened
illegal
to thousands
person,
of girls,
if an illegal
legal and
immigrant,
legal. Yeah.
okay, but if one got caught for that activity and went to jail, would they be deported after that?
No.
Interesting.
So I'll give you an example that was reported on recently. There was a case of I can't remember. I think he may have been Jamaican, but that might be wrong. He was in prison for, it may have been assault or it may have been drug charges. And when he came out of prison, the Home Office filed a deportation order, and the man applied to the European Court of Human Rights on the basis that before he went in prison, he'd fathered an illegitimate child with a married woman. He filed for a paternity test. The paternity test showed that the man was in fact the father. And then the European Court of Human Rights decided that the welfare of the child would be harmed if the man who had been sent to prison for various offences was to be deported. So he was allowed to remain in the country. That's just one example. A second example, a man was recently released from prison, has children in this country and was scheduled for deportation. Indian, this man was. He applied again to the European Court of Human Rights, and he had children, and the European Court of Human Rights said that his deportation would affect the well-being of the children sufficiently for him to not be deported. What was his crime? It was the possession and distribution of indecent images of children. So this is the situation that the UK finds itself in. We cannot deport foreign criminals who are abusing our system. And we also have a case where recently the Starmer government, the Labour government, left-wing government, basically we have an issue with prison overcrowding. And they decided that in order to facilitate new people going into prison, they would release 5,000 of these prisoners, and many of them have been released. Now, the government said that it would not be releasing some of the more violent offenders. Actually, it released dozens of them and dozens of sexual assault and other related criminals as well. At the same time, there are 12,000 foreign-born criminals housed in the criminal justice system. So you could deport all of those people and do double and a bit off the 5,000 target. That's not what they did. And the reason that they didn't is because they can't. And the reason that they can't is because of the European Court of Human Rights, which none of the major political parties, with the exception of Reform, want to leave. So this problem just isn't going to be solved.
Okay.
And that's the situation that we find ourselves in.
When it comes to you voting, what are your thoughts? Because I was thinking you were saying that the party that you prefer claimed that they were going to do something about this and didn't. Does that affect who you vote for? Like, is there somebody that's a current popular politician that at one point had a chance to do something that they said they were going to do, didn't do it, and now, even though they're part of the party you support, you will not vote for that individual?
Yeah. So David Cameron promised in 2010 and 2015 to reduce immigration. He didn't. He increased it. Theresa May in 2017, she promised it. She didn't. Boris Johnson won the election in 2019. He was ousted. And then we got Rishi Sunak. The only major party candidate who's making an honest pledge to reduce immigration and to deal with these problems, leave the ECHR, is Nigel Farage and his Reform Party. That's who I voted for in the recent election. But because of the way our electoral system works, despite the fact that they received almost 4.5 million votes, I think it was, they only received 4 seats out of 650 in our parliament. And until they breach that threshold, they will not they won't have the power to affect change. And the thing that's standing in their way is the Conservative Party, which won the elections that I just spoke about. They had a chance in this election to, they had 2 choices. They had Kemi Badenoch, who is one candidate, and then they had Robert Gendrick, who's another candidate. And Robert Gendrick was promising to leave the ECHR so that he could fix the immigration problem. And Kemi Badenoch was not. And Kemi Badenoch got selected as the Conservative leader. Okay. So the two main parties are not going to address this issue. The only party that has promised to is Nigel Farage's. And there's an argument that they just don't have a chance electorally because of the way the system works. So yeah, I don't see where this is going to get fixed.
Yeah, that's wild. Okay, well, I'm going to ask you in a backwards way how you would fix it. So let's imagine there is zero immigration. There's no legal, no illegal, nothing at all right now. And you are in charge of making choices of how things work. Would you allow any? And if so, what would that look like?
Yeah, so I would essentially have what amounts to essentially what the parlance that used to be used in this country was points-based immigration system. So basically, we have an upper limit of numbers that we need in this country that's set at a basic cap, and then we essentially target the areas of the economy that are most in need. And so we look at the people who have the best qualifications for the jobs that we need them to do, and then we bring those people in the numbers that we need them. And so realistically, that would be presently we need a period where we kind of correct. So I would say net zero for the next maybe 5 to 10 years, but where we have net inflows and outflows of zero. But realistically, 30 to 50,000 a year, maybe with an upper limit of about 70,000, would be about enough.
Okay, and how do you feel about asylum seeking?
Again, restrictive and selective. For example, not to go too deep into the problem, but there's been conversation recently about having a what's known as the Gaza settlement scheme, so resettling refugees from Gaza, but no parliamentary discussions of note about, for example, providing asylum to persecuted Christians who live in the Muslim world. That's one area where our asylum system is broken, that it allows people who really ought not to be claiming asylum to claim asylm.
Do you think people asylum
who have genuine need often get lost in the system?
Do you think asylum is ever something that should, well, I'm trying to think. I was going to say it's something that should grant citizenship or just protection for a while, but then again, if they're seeking asylum, it wouldn't be best for them to go back to the country that they were originally from. I'm just pondering ideas of like, are there ways that a country could help people that are in need without saying that we are going to let you become citizens?
I would say that, the assumption you're making in giving them citizenship is that they would have wanted to be here in the first place. And so I would not take that assumption. The assumption that I would take is that these people would rather be where they grew up. They would rather be in the country that they identify with the people that they are familiar with. And so if asylum is provided, it should be provided on a temporary basis and should be reviewed in a kind of standard cyclical way.
Gotcha. Yeah. And I don't know what people usually seek asylum for, but I would imagine it would be something where going back wouldn't make sense. But then it would be like, if we accept why they're seeking it, we'd have to view the country they're coming from as just being bad all around. And like, I don't know how you'd fix that. Like, so if you seek asylum because there's too many drug cartels in a certain country or something like that, then would it just be that you can let them be in your country until the drug cartels are handled in that country they're from, and then they go back? Yeah, I don't know.
What the problem is that there's an upper limit to how many people you can realistically accept. I don't think that the onus ought to be on whether someone has a right to come to your country and the rights that they can call upon to stay in the country. I think that you have a well of generosity and you can choose to extend that generosity as far or as in a limited a way as you would like. And so that's up to the host nation to decide how many it can possibly support. I don't necessarily think, because if you were going to make the judgment on whether the place that someone was returned to or was coming from was safe, then you basically open up your asylum system to be used by about 40% of the world. So that's not tenable.
Gotcha. Yeah.
I'd also say that, and this is a bit I mentioned before about something that you said specifically. You said to Eric, when you were talking about immigration and the need to have immigrants and how many immigrants you would be willing to allow into your country, you said, "I don't think I deserve this place any more than anyone else," is what you said. And I would like to challenge you on that. I would like to convince you that actually the place where you live, America, and I think you live in, is it Oregon?
Yeah.
Oregon, yeah. You deserve that place more than anyone else. Okay? You are entitled to live in a society which is recognizably your own because it's been created by and served to you by the willful labors of your forebears. It belongs to you as your birthright by what has been passed down to you and by what has been given to you by the people who intended it for you. So think of it like the metaphor that I've got for you is, imagine that you have a tapestry that your family have kept for generations, going back, say, 300, 500, 1,000 years. And each generation of your family and every member of your family has weaved itself into the fabric of the tapestry. So they've depicted themselves and their position in society and their place in society, the customs and traditions that your family have developed over time. And they've weaved it into this tapestry as a record of their achievements and of their vision for the future for you. Okay. And so you have this beautiful tapestry, the beautiful colors, the beautiful weaving, the techniques that they developed over time. And it's given to you, and it's distinctly yours. It's distinctly the Hughes tapestry. Okay. And then someone comes to you and says that that tapestry does not belong to you, or you do not deserve to work on that tapestry any more than anyone else. And they demand that they work themselves into the tapestry of your ancestry, that they use their own colors and their own materials, and that they have the right to take scissors to the old bits of your tapestry that they don't like and that offend them. What would you say to those people?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think that would be
you
something
see
past. Yeah.
You see the metaphor. Your society is your tapestry, and you live in a current of civilization. You live at the end of, or on a waypoint of, a flow of, and a thread of time, a thread of place, a thread of culture, tradition, aesthetics, manners, and language, and all of the things that make your culture identifiably your culture, and you as an identifiable product of that culture. That's what you are. That's all you have.
Yeah.
And, that is what you have a right to demand is kept, if not wholly intact, mostly intact.
Yeah.
Because you have nothing else.
I think you're right. And I think you're right on a whole bunch of different levels. I think I think I meant something different by deserve, and I'll try to explain it a little further. But yeah, like, so if, let's say the house I was in was left to me by, my parents, like it's their old house and they died and it became my house. Like I don't think anybody else should have the house over me. Like, I don't think some stranger should actually get it. When I say the deserve thing, I guess I just mean, like, so I'm randomly born and then I am the person I am, and somebody else is born, let's say in I don't know, just some horrible country where there is just like there's no food and there's a 50% chance they're going to starve or whatever. Like two people just being born in two random places. I just like I lucked out, and so like I didn't do anything to exist in a way where like I deserve anything more than them. It's I guess it's more so that like my parents deserve to give me whatever I get, and then so on and so forth. And so it's not that I'm saying I shouldn't have it or that somebody else should have it. It's just that I can recognize. The same thing would be like with intelligence. Somebody could be born very low intelligence. Some person could be very high intelligence, and neither of those individuals did anything to deserve it. I don't believe in any religion, so that might have a different effect if you think God intended this person to be unintelligent and this person to be intelligent. So it's not that I'm saying like I would want to like exchange my intelligence for somebody that might be lesser than mine or more than mine or whatever. It's just that I'm recognizing that I can part of why I can feel for somebody that like let's say hates living in Mexico and having to have run-ins with like drug cartels and stuff is that person just randomly was born there. They're born with the brain they have, the looks they have, the location that's going to maybe be not great for them. It wouldn't matter what good things they do. Potentially, they might have a horrible life. Where if I acted the same way they acted throughout life, might have a better life because where I'm at. That's kind of what I mean by deserve is like I guess I just empathize with anybody that doesn't have as well of a life as I have. And then I don't know if I view it from the other direction where if somebody has a better life than me, how I view that, but just as far as a worse one.
It's okay to empathize. And as I spoke before, every country and every society has, and even every person has a well of compassion that they can expend on the causes that they feel is worthy. I would just say that a way to maybe reconceptualize it is to say that you as you are not random, actually. You are a product of a time and a place and an inheritance that the society around you was built up by the people who came before you, and you have imbibed their traditions and their culture and their sensibilities in more or less regard. That's not random. It is random only in the sense that you happen to come into existence, but now you are in existence. This is where you belong.
Mm-hmm. No, and
this
I
is what
agree.
you're owed, and you're owed. You're owed what your parents can give to you, and you have a responsibility to give what you can give to your own children. Mm-hmm. And so it's connected. And so it's okay for you to say, yes, I deserve to live here and I deserve to have the society that I have because the society that I have has been crafted by my people. It's been crafted by my parents and by my parents' friends and all going back as far as you want. And you have the right to that. You have the right to that. And so you can give people compassion and you can allow people in certain measure, but you have a right to say that which is recognizably yours should not be destroyed and replaced and diluted by things from outside. That's perfectly natural, perfectly healthy, I think.
No, I completely agree. Hey, I got to hop off here in just a sec, but there's one more question from the chat. Are you able to see it, the question that I put up here on the screen?
Yes. Wonder how this thought process applies to people within your own culture who would do likewise. Is there a difference between change from within or from new people? Well, every society goes through periods of change. Even within generations, you have elections and you have cultural movements and um, quite radical reformations and quite radical revolutions that go through. And um, you can object to them in your time. Obviously, if you don't agree to them, you can object to them. But ultimately, that is a process that society goes through. What I'm objecting to is not changes to society, which are natural and which occur as the result of movements, but the artificial external decomposition of your society.
Mm-hmm.
And I think
Yeah.
that's as important as any other consideration, economic concerns or anything like that. And you have a right to recognize the place you were brought up in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think I mostly agree with that. And the example I would give to this person asking the question would be something like this. If I don't want to dog on Muslims too much. I do personally challenge the religion, but more so I challenge actions of individuals. There might be same thing with so I'm an atheist, but if there was a Christian that was going to not do bad things, then that's great. But if there's a Christian that's going to do bad things in the name of the religion, it's bad. So me bringing up Muslims again is not. I'm not trying to attack anybody for their beliefs, but imagine. So the U.S. has 330 million people, but let's imagine it only had 100. Okay, 100 million people, and then all of a sudden we decide to let 100 million Muslims immigrate, and now the U.S. is made up of the 100 million people that were just here, 100 million like the ones that are currently here, and then now there's 100 million Muslims that come over, and let's say that these are more like radical Sharia law type Muslims, and then something's put to a vote. And then right now, I'm experiencing this country that I'm experiencing now, like this example of the tapestry. But then a new vote comes in, and then all of a sudden, I find out my wife and all the women I know legally have to cover their faces. Then this world that I'm in, that I've been part of. I've been voting on things, and I've been sharing with my fellow citizens like my stances on morals and laws and all these things. Now all of a sudden, because a group of people coming from outside instantly make this change, like that's a huge change. Somebody being able to wear whatever they want, and then now all of a sudden can like have to cover their face up and their body up, and if they don't, then there might be unspeakable things happening to them. So that's kind of my main answer to this question.
I would say as well that it doesn't necessarily, I mean, that's obviously a concern. If you basically replace one population with another, then it's no longer your society, but it's in the little things as well.
Mm-hmm.
The example that I always use, I read a letter once, and I've noticed it myself. A little British thing that we do is when we get the bus, public transport, when we get off the bus, we say thank you to the driver. We just turn around, thank you, thanks, drive. You get off. Cheers, pal. Cheers, buddy. Whatever.
Mm-hmm.
That's fading. And there was an article. There was a letter that was written to a commentator that I follow, basically on this, and he said, "People don't thank me. I'm a bus driver. I've done this for 30 years, and most people don't say thank you anymore." Does that matter? Does it matter that people don't say thank you on the bus anymore? Well, probably not. Maybe it's a bit irrational, but it was notably a British thing that's becoming in shorter and shorter supply. And I think that these things matter, that the expectations that you have of behavior of the people around you, even in the little seemingly pointless customs, matter. That is the fabric of society that you wear on a day-to-day basis. And unfortunately, mass immigration has made that fabric more coarse and uncomfortable and less familiar. And that's all there is to say on it, really.
Yeah, no, and I agree. Like, I don't necessarily like. I haven't noticed, even though we have I don't know much about it, but I think we have an immigration problem here. I haven't specifically noticed that having an effect. The one that you have is a scarier one. I personally have I view more concern with the religion of Islam and how it can be affect you, kind of like you're talking about with like female circumcisions and stuff like that.
Yeah.
There is some issue of like gang related stuff and drug related stuff, fentanyl and stuff.
Mm.
But I don't know if there's a huge impact on immigration in my country and traditions changing. Traditions can change and it can be natural, and we could be against it or for it. Like, I wish that people would value and respect older people more, and I feel like they used to, and they don't now. I don't think that's an immigration issue. It might just be generations change, and it. We can. I just want to point that out in case the person that asked the question thought that either of us were saying that a change that's bad likely is coming from immigration. I think that
Well,
it's
I'd say,
possible.
because I've got to go. So I'll just say a couple more things. Which is, firstly, there are tangible concerns. For example, there've been a marked increase, or at least a greater level of publicity for declining care standards in elderly care,
Mm.
as there's been a correlative rise in the number of foreign-born temporary work visa related and low income people who've been drafted in to provide those services, so, and provide that employment. And there are loads of little things, and maybe you won't notice them until they're gone, but there are lots of issues. The second thing is that I have to go, but hopefully, I don't know if Eric is watching this, or if you want to mention it, but we didn't get to the US election, but I would be interested to maybe debate this topic, the topic of the US election, and also immigration, with someone on this.
Yeah.
And I know Eric is a big proponent of the pro-immigration and anti-Trump perspective.
Yeah.
I'm anti-immigration and pro-Trump. So if you want to do that, and if Eric wants to do that, I'd be happy to do that, because I think there's a lot more ground to cover here, and a lot more time to for.
Yeah, let's set it up. All right, well, thanks for talking. I'm going to stay on here and answer one more question, but I'm going to let you get going, and I'll talk to you soon.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
Yep, take
See you
care.
in a bit.
All right. So I just want to respond to that one extra question of I suppose I don't necessarily see the difference between that and people. Let's see, I'll pull this up. That and people moving from state to state and changing their culture. Would we also suggest people don't move state to state? I don't know if that was in response to my example I gave about like if 100 million Muslims came in and then the women in the U.S. had to start covering their faces, or if it was to something that Harley said. But no, I think yeah, it's really tricky because like in one sense you could imagine big change from outside being like a positive thing. Like if you take a culture like the Mayans or the Aztecs that did like human sacrifices and stuff, if you all of a sudden just had a bunch of people show up and like mix in with them and then have good ideas that made people stop doing human sacrifice, then this is a good thing. So I don't think it's as simple as just saying change is bad or outside change or anything like that. But I do think that, yeah, so you know, we most of what our laws are and how things are affected and change happen are come down to over time the majority of people feeling a certain way. Eventually, the majority of people led to there being no slavery and women having more rights, right to vote, and all these different things. And it just seems like within an area that what people would call home, their country or their state or whatever, that you have people, and then those people make more people. You have offspring, and then so slowly over time, with people debating and discussing things change. And I think slow change is usually best. And so I just think drastic is probably no good. So yeah, if people move state to state, like I'm trying to think of examples. Yeah, like I know a handful of people that have moved from like the state I'm in to another state, or people that have moved here. and like people just slowly moving from state to state and maybe moving from like a Democratic state to a Republican state, they might notice a bit of difference, but usually every state still has like I'm in Oregon, and Oregon's a very blue state, but like 40% of the people here are Republican leaning and 60% are Democratic leaning. So it's not like if Trump supporters move to Oregon, they're going to like not find any fellow Trump supporters or something, or same the other way around. It's not like if Democrats move to Texas, they're not going to find fellow Democrats or whatever. Um, so yeah, like I don't think there's a right and wrong answer necessarily, but I personally like the country I'm in. I like the laws for the most part. I like having conversations with people and working towards change and things like that. And so yeah, there's a little bit of a fear of um, people, especially like with religious ideas that aren't currently here. If a large amounts of people appeared here and had say over what the laws and stuff were that had like religious views, I think that's a big difference than whatever is currently here. And then so to to answer the question about the difference from the people changing the culture, the best example I could think of would be, what if, due to the internet or something, that people currently here learned about another religion, like let's say Islam or something, and then started converting to that religion. And then therefore, we're not even talking about new people coming in. Let's just say out of the 330 million people that are here, that like 200 million of them all of a sudden convert to Islam. Um, yeah, I mean that's always possible, and that's not like as far as my stance would go, that's not any better. Um, it's just less of a concern, less of a likelihood. And so, like, if that was what would happen, that would lead to like my wife having to cover her face up, like you do in a handful of Islamic countries. Then that would be just as bad as if you had a bunch of people come in that are voting differently. The outcome's still the same. So I guess my concern is like maybe with the likelihood and with the values. Like currently, like in any country, the 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 population of that country has the average values they have, and values don't seem to change too drastically. So, anyways, I'm kind of just rambling a possible answer, but this is what's off the top of my head. But I love hearing different ideas and whatnot. Anyways, thank you guys all for listening and watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care.